guys, how are you? Welcome to another episode of my channel. Today we'll be talking about grief. Grief is the loss of something, be it divorce, that's the loss of a spouse, death, where you lose a person and it's the finality of life with this person, and then losing a home is also considered grief. Some people lose jobs. So there's many ways you can explain it, but it's the basic of grief is the loss of something for most people. People experience it differently, take it in different stages. Same people can experience the same exact loss, but the reaction to the loss is going to be different to both of them, because everybody can deal with loss in their own way. There's no right or wrong way, but everybody can deal with loss in their own way. So grief is a hard one. It affects many people. It affects different areas of our lives. We go through stages to deal with the grief. Different people go through different stages. There's 5 stages of grief, but not everybody goes through the stages of grief in the order that they are written, and some people deal with it in a different way. So we'll go on an overview of, and I do have notes today because it's a long topic, of what exactly is grief. Is the experience of coping with loss, whatever the loss is, because there are many losses in life. So the big one that everybody knows is the finality of death, but there are other losses that people go through. If you do speak to somebody who's gone through a divorce, it feels like a death too, and that's a huge loss because it requires quite an adjustment to the person's life. So loss is different things. Most of us assume it's painful after death, but there are many things that can cause grief. Death being the number one, that's what we all think, but divorce is another one. The loss of a home, like the fightings in countries that's going on, like the Gaza people, Israeli people, that's grief. That's heavy duty, high level grief. So those are some of the losses. I'll go through other losses that people grieve. A family or friend, partner, or pet. Pet is another one too. If you've had a pet for a long time and you lose the pet, that's grief. That's grief. If you've had a friend for a long time and for some reason the friendship ends, that's grief. Your home, you lived in a home and you lose the home, you will go through a process of grieving for that home, especially if it was somewhere you spent some time with, mostly 1 year or more. Financial stability, loss of financial stability can cause grief in your life. Good health, that's one we assume because we wake up every day, we are feeling good and everything. The day you lose good health and you're diagnosed with a disease, or maybe you have an accident and you don't have your health back, you have to learn how to walk again, or you have shoulder injury and now you don't have the use of your shoulder the way you were used to, and you have to go through therapy to get back full range of motion of that shoulder. There's always some grief there of what was, even though you're working to what was to become what is or what was before, but you do have some level of grief. Health is a huge one because most people are able to wake up, keep going, and then one day you don't have that. It's painful. It's painful no matter how you look at it. The loss of youth, you regret that you didn't do certain things in your younger years, so to speak, and now you're older. So there are people who will grieve that loss. Naturally, they do grieve loss, or they feel like if they were younger, they'd be able to do certain things, but now since they lost that, they grieve the loss of that youth. Fertility for some people, you were trying to carry a baby and then you tried and tried and tried. It took a long time, and some people are able to, but they lose the child, and that's a painful grief period for them. Painful, unimaginable grief for them. A marriage, a friendship, loss of a marriage. If you speak, as I said, if you speak to divorced people, they'll tell you it feels like a death. You spend 20 years together, maybe 5 years together, or 10 years, and then this person is no longer there. You'll always grieve the person that's no longer there, even though you have a chance at love again, but there's always the grief of that few years you spent together, be it 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, or 2 years, whatever it is that you spend together. You will grieve that loss, even though later on you have a chance at love, but there's always the grief of that loss. Some people grieve their own life when they are in a period transitioning to death. So to speak, you've gone through everything. Maybe you have something like cancer, and they've told you, we've done everything we can and there's nothing else we can do. So you know it's coming, but before it comes, you do grieve that period of time, however long it is, 6 months or less to live, or 1 year. You know, the way doctors do give a certain amount of time. You got 6 months to live, or you got a year to live. In that 6 months, however prepared you are, in that 1 year, however prepared you are, you will grieve that loss, even though it's pending. It's a pending loss, but you do grieve that loss naturally for most people. There are stages of grief that were written by somebody called Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. There are 5 stages of grief. There are people who will go through the stages as they are, and there are people who go through the stages not in a particular way, but they go through the stages the way they best know how to when it happens to them. Those stages were written. There are 5 stages. Doesn't mean that everybody follows them the way they are written. Some people go through them at different times. Some people will go through number 4 before they go through number 1. It was just written as a groundwork, but it's not a follow. You're not supposed to follow it. It's really, you don't have to follow it. I'll go through the stages as she wrote them. Her name is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She wrote a book in 1969 about the 5 stages of grief. And the way she mentioned it, the initial one, not necessarily how you're to go through it, but her first one was denial. Most people in grief will first have denial that they are in this process. So denial is number 1. Accepting that the loss is real. It's hard for a lot of people to accept that the loss is real. Whether it's a relationship, divorce, a loved one, it's hard to accept. Loss is difficult. So no matter how strong you are, it's always hard to accept. Second one is anger. You will have anger towards whatever it is that's happening, the loss that you're going through. You have anger saying, why me? Why is this happening to me? That is natural for most of us, technically. You'll be angry at God. Why did this happen? If you're somebody who believes in God, whatever the higher power is for you that you believe in, you may be angry at them for causing this loss to happen to you. Is it abnormal? No, it's natural. It's a natural process of grieving. It happens to the best of us. So you may be angry at whoever your higher power is. For me, is God. So you may be angry at God for causing the loss to happen to your life. Bargaining. You reach a place where you're bargaining about the loss. You're bargaining with yourself. You're bargaining with your emotions. How do I deal with this loss? You know, start kind of figuring out, how am I going to deal with this loss? Sometimes you regret past actions. Was it my actions that caused the loss? People question themselves. It's a natural process, nothing to be embarrassed about. It's a natural process. And then you do have depression. Some people may experience complex emotions associated with depression when they do have a huge loss in their lives. Depression, and then acceptance. The 5th stage of loss, grief, 5 stages. The 5th stage is acceptance. You've gone through all the emotions, you've bargained, you have questioned God, you're wondering, why me? Why did I go through this? And then, you get to the stage of acceptance. You accept it, and from there, doesn't make the loss less, but at least it's a bit manageable for you. And this takes a process of time. You've probably gone through 2 or 3 years of it, that you've gotten to a level of accepting the finality of whatever the grief was at the time. It's kind of embracing the loss. You've embraced the loss. You've gone through the emotions, done everything you can to the best that you can, and then eventually you embrace it. That's acceptance. So she's put it in those 5 stages, but it does say not everybody goes through the 5 stages. It's not an order. You don't have to start with denial and then go to bargaining, depression, accept. No, it's not an order. She just placed it there as the 5 stages of grief, but you don't have to go through the order. Some people will go through the order. Most people, when it first happens, is denial. That's normal for most people, but it's very clear that she says you don't have to go through the 5 stages in the order that she has named them as denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. You can go however randomly you want to go. But those are the 5 stages by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, 5 stages of grief. Then we go through what are some types of grief. Anticipatory grief is one of them. Anticipatory grief is where you haven't experienced the loss, you know it's coming, but you really haven't experienced it yet. But you know for sure that it's coming. That's anticipatory grief. For example, terminal illness is the best way I can put it. Terminal illness that you know, you've gone through the treatments, you've gone through the chemotherapy, whatever it is, you've gone through and there's nothing else they can do. There's a finality to it. You know that it's coming no matter how long it's delayed. So that is anticipatory grief. We have another grief. I'll jump that one, abbreviated grief. I'll jump that one. Then you have delayed grief. Instead of experiencing the emotions that come with the grief, immediately it happens. You're going through stuff. I would give a good example. If a close person has died, you're going through the paperwork, the will, the trust, everything. So your grief is delayed, not because you're not grieving, you have stuff to do. Once you have settled, the paperwork is all in order, much later on, the grief hits you. You've seen people at funerals who are who are normal, completely normal. And sometimes it's because they have so much to do prior to the funeral that they didn't sit in their emotions. They didn't experience their emotions at the time. When everything is gone and the dust has settled, that's when the grief hits. That's delayed grief. Inhibited grief involves repressing the emotions. Some people block the emotions. Don't deal with it. Don't want to talk about it. Don't want to think about it. That's inhibited grief. It depends on how they process it, but that's their way of processing it. And then later on, once the wall is down, they go through their grief. But they can inhibit it. They can inhibit it, refuse to deal with it at the time. Repress their emotions and put it aside. Totally put it aside. And then you have cumulative grief. Cumulative grief. You're working through multiple losses at a go. Could be you lost your job. In the process of losing your job, you weren't able to afford the house, so then you lose both of them. That's cumulative grief. It's a lot to handle at a time, but it comes all at once. You hear when it rains, it pours. Some people in real life, when that happens, it can be a little too much to handle. Not can be a little too much, it's too much to handle for anybody. Cumulative grief. And then another one is collective grief. Most people have personal grief, but there is collective grief. A lot of us go through collective grief. Wars, like what's happening in Gaza and Israel, that's a collective grief for the people that live in both of those countries. What happened to Russia and Ukraine? Collective grief. The people of Russia are grieving. The people of Ukraine are grieving. That's collective grief. What happens to shootings in school or at your workplace? That's collective grief, because all these people come together for that grief that's occurring in their lives, whatever the grief is at the time. Pandemics, COVID, that was a collective grief too. A lot of people experience it at the same time, so that is what is considered collective grief. Let's go through what are the symptoms and causes of grief for most people. Emotional symptoms. Grief can affect every aspect of your being. You're not able to function because of the grief that you're having at the present time in your life. The people around you experience it through you, through your actions or through your feelings, whatever it is you're going through. They may understand, they may not understand, but that is grief. Grieving of the person that they knew to be before the person experienced grief. Emotional symptoms, sadness that a loved one is gone, But then again, if the loved one had suffered, you're okay that they've gone. You'll still grieve their loss, but you feel like they're at peace. So that's one of the emotional ones. After a divorce, yearning for the spouse. That's one I talked about. Even though you're now open for love, there's always the loss of the spouse that you had shared. Whatever the years are, if it was 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, there's grieving of that loss if you speak to somebody who's experienced a divorce. Guilt for feeling grateful that if you were taking care of somebody, you no longer have to take care of them around the clock. As much as you enjoyed it, but you do go through that. You do go through that. Competing feelings, apathy, anger, sadness, those are all emotions coming together because of grief that has happened to you. So a lot of people experience it in different ways, but it happens to all of us. Some people will have physical symptoms from the grief. Feeling of fatigue, headaches. Headaches are so severe. You get severe headaches because you're going through grief of some sort. Headaches, fatigue, decreased appetite. Decreased appetite, you no longer eat the way you used to. Restlessness, upset stomach, lack of sleep. You're sleeping, but you're not sleeping because your head is down, but you're not well rested because your mind is racing. Weakness, muscle or joint pain is, some people go through that. Tightness in your chest or throat, that feeling of there's something, there's something, but you can't do anything about it. I talked about restlessness, feeling nauseous, unable to eat. You can't eat. If you do eat, you usually just pick at the food, not like fully get satisfied, is what I mean. So loss is physical. It can cause physical symptoms. It's an extreme stressor. So your body will react in all those ways. You were able to eat during a period of loss or grief. You don't eat as much. You don't eat the same. You have no appetite. You may eat breakfast and that's it for the day, and you don't think about food again. Fatigue, headache, nausea, they all come as physical symptoms because they wreak havoc on your nervous system. So all those can affect you. Watch out for those symptoms. You may not even be aware. It has to be somebody who's with you talk about, you haven't eaten lunch and you didn't eat this and this. Or later on, you're losing weight and then you can recall why you're losing weight after you think of what you've been through. At the time that you're going through it, you may not catch it. You may not be able to catch it. Those are your physical symptoms that I mentioned. Behavioral changes. Your behaviors change. You forget stuff. You're so stressed. You can be driving to go somewhere and you're not able to get to there. Take a totally opposite road to where you're used to going because your mind is not there. Your mind is not functioning at optimal level. It's not functioning at the optimal level of somebody who's in sync with everything. This is somebody who's going through loss of whatever kind and their mind is not there. Trouble thinking or making decisions. It's the worst time to make those decisions because your mind is not working optimally. Feeling as if you've lost a sense of hope or direction. That's tough. But that's a feeling that you get during those periods of time. Difficulty focusing on anything else in your life other than the loss you've gone through. Difficulty remembering or keeping track of your responsibilities. And it's nothing to blame you. It just happens because of the magnitude of the loss. The magnitude of the loss or whatever the grief is that you're going through at the period that you're going through it. So nothing to blame you, but it does happen to the best of us. Complications of grief. There are many complications. Many complications. Some people can go through grief and the grief becomes depression. It's so prolonged that you get yourself into a depressive state without knowing. Life took over. It became so hard on you. You may not have had the support that you should have had at the time, and it sends some people into depression. It's complex. It's complex. Grief is so complex that it cannot be explained in an easy manner. It cannot. It cannot. People handle it differently. And whatever way they handle it is best for them, but they handle it differently. It's a very complex situation. Very complex situation. Challenging, complicated, different people experiencing it differently. Same loss, but total different experiences. But it's grief. It's grief. Hard topic to deal with, but it does happen to us. The symptoms can actually interfere with your daily life. You stop doing what you used to do because you're just so consumed about the grief. So consumed about the grief. It can be difficult. There's absent grief also, where you're not showing any outward signs. There are no outward signs that you're in grief at all. You're frozen in denial. So there are no signs at all that you're in grief. You're really frozen in denial. So that's absent grief. Other times a person may not appear to be grieving, but is privately working through their grief process. As I said, some people it's obvious, you can see. Some people it's not obvious, and some people it's absent, but they're really going through it in their own way. Ambiguous loss, where there was no closure. You had the loss, but you didn't have closure. That's a tough one. If you don't have any kind of closure, you know. An example would be a loved one is presumed dead, but you guys never got the body. These are cases like in the war, or where there's a rubble in the building broke down, you can't find the body, but you're told the person is dead. You're not in touch with them. There was no finality to it. There was no body to come to get buried, and that is it's hard. You don't get closure on those kind of grief. It's really hard. I can't imagine the person having closure, other than knowing their person was living in this building and this building fell at a certain time and the person has been missing ever since. So you presume the person is dead, but you've never had closure. There was no body to be found. There was no body to be buried. That's a tough one. Disenfranchised grief, where you're grieving, but society doesn't think you should be grieving. They kind of question your grief. It's weird that they question your grief, even though it's not them. What happens to most people, if they haven't experienced something, they usually judge. Most people will judge what they haven't experienced until they experience it. Then they can have a different perspective to it. But there will be lots of judges before they walk that journey. Once they walk their journey, their perspective is different. But before they walk their journey, they'll judge you a lot. So that's disenfranchised grief. Traumatic grief, when you're processing both a loss and a trauma at the same time. I don't think there's a grief that's easier than the other. They all seem complicated when you look through the stages. Natural disasters, accidents, violent deaths that lead to trauma. All these griefs, they're different, but they're all heavy in their own way. Grief can be considered complicated or prolonged when even a year after the loss, you still feel as if part of yourself is lost or has died with the grief that you experienced. You don't believe the death or loss has occurred. You avoid reminders of the death or loss. You experience intense emotional pain relating to the loss. You feel emotionally numb, lonely, as if your life doesn't have meaning or purpose. That happens especially around that loss time. Most people will go through those periods of time where they question themselves and just, their life has lost meaning. Why are they even living? You know, that's what they think. Why are they even living? In the midst and the magnitude of it all, you can question yourself why you experienced why you went through such an experience. Because it's so huge. They find it difficult to leave, make plans with friends because they've experienced this loss that it's hard for them to even think there's anything beyond the loss. Until they process it, they go through the time to process it. They go through the emotions, which are difficult to go through. But once they go through the emotions, a bit of time has surpassed, then they can think of that. But in that time, it's hard for them to process. Let's make dates with friends. Let's meet people, because almost their life is at a standstill. Their life is at a standstill. People ask, how long does it last? It depends. It depends on the person experiencing it. One thing that helps with grief is time. But even time is different. There are people who at 5 years are still grieving, understandably so. Not questionably so, but understandably so. At 5 years, you're still grieving. 6 years, you could still be grieving. At 2 years, you could still be grieving. So there's no one size fits all. There's no one size fits all for the grief. Symptoms gradually improve with time. They gradually improve with time. So if you're a friend or a support system to somebody, be patient. Be patient. Help them work through the process. Be very supportive to them, because you don't know how long it will take. And you can't guarantee them it's going to take a certain time. You don't know. You don't know. They don't know. You don't know. So be supportive. Visit. Be a listening ear. Be a listening ear to them. Support them in the best way that you can. In the best way that you can, without a timetable. Without a timetable, because it is so individualized that you cannot give somebody a timetable of how long the grief should be. It has no timeline. It has no timeline. So if you're the supportive friend, be there until the time passes. However long it is, that's not for you to judge. That's for your friend eventually to come and say she feels better, but it's not for you to judge. Be supportive, be there, be in the dark with them until they walk through the process. How can I cope with grief? People ask. It takes time and patience. Be gracious to yourself. Give yourself grace. Give yourself lots of grace. There's no timetable to it. Don't beat yourself over how come you haven't gotten through it. Give yourself time and grace. There are things you can do to make coping better, but give yourself lots of time and lots of grace. Practice self-care. Taking care of your body and mind is essential. It may help lessen the process. The process is still long, but it may help lessen the process. Get enough sleep if you can. Sometimes in the midst of grief, you can't get the sleep. But if you can, get enough sleep, or take a nap. Take a nap, something that can rest you. May be very hard to do because you're not able to sleep, but if you can, take a nap. Meditate, practice yoga. Take a bubble bath. If you're one of those people who enjoys taking a bubble bath, take a bubble bath. That may relax the muscles. Stick to a routine if that helps you. Stick to a routine, because grief can interrupt routines. It totally interrupts routines. So your sense of normalcy, whatever that is, stick to that. It may make you gain a sense of control if you stick to a routine. If you're able to, sometimes you're not even able to follow a routine at that time. You're just in such a mess that you can't. Attend to your emotions. As painful as it is to sit in these emotions, attend to your emotions. If we can attend to the emotions, that would be part of the healing. But it's painful to sit in the emotions. Extremely painful to sit in the emotions. Allow yourself to cry. It's okay to cry. It's okay to cry. Move your grief outward by expressing your feelings to somebody, if you do have a loved one close to, or singing a song or dancing, if you're able to dance. But expressing it outward kind of moves the grief out of you into something else and kind of lessens the grief. Reach out to others. Reach out to others. These are the friends we are talking about that we can reach out to see if they can be supportive. See if they can be supportive during this time. It's okay to need alone time, and you can make that known to your friends that it's not a good time to visit, but on this day you can come visit. Or a friend will ask you, let me know when it's a good time to visit. Respect them when they tell you that. Respect them when they tell you that, because it's not your grief to carry, so you can't judge how they experience it. Remind yourself that not everything has changed, even if it feels like it at the time. Remind yourself that not everything has changed. There are people in your life who love you, they support you, and they will be there with you through this journey. However long it takes, however long they have to go and be supportive and sit in silence with you. Speak to a therapist or a grief counselor. Some people go to see therapists that can help remove the emotions from inward to outward. A counselor, we have grief counselors that just do grief counseling. If you get a very good counselor, they can walk you through your emotions. They can sit with you through your emotions. And for friends, support the ones who are grieving a loss. Be present. Even if you don't say anything, be present at their deepest time of need. It's a way you can support them as a friend. Being there is enough. You don't have to say anything sometimes. You can sit in that dead silence, as uncomfortable as it is, and be there for them. Offer to help. Not everyone feels comfortable asking for help, especially in a grieving time. So you offer to help them at any time. Tell them, I'm available if you need this. I can help you with this. Volunteer to help. You can drive the kids to school, whatever it is that you're helping them with. Help with laundry, cook and take them some food, so volunteer to help. You can signal to them that you're open to talking if they are ready to talk. You can signal to them that you're open to talking if they are ready to talk. Don't minimize their loss. Do not minimize their loss. Most people have a way of minimizing something they haven't experienced. Never ever minimize anybody's loss. However way they experience it, it's their loss. They have a right to experience it the best way they know how. Do not minimize their loss. Do not minimize their loss. Allow them to process it in the way they know how. Even though you don't agree with it. It's not your business to agree with it. It is not your place to agree with it. Support them and just be supportive, but do not minimize anybody's loss. Weird things people tell people. They're in a better place now if it's a loved one who's died. Those are not things to say. It's quite inappropriate to say anything. If you can't say anything, just sit in silence. There are words we tell people who are grieving that are so uncomfortable. So uncomfortable. So, the words you don't say. They are rested now. They're in a better place now. Who are you to judge? Do not tell them what you think. Just, it's better to sit in silence, or it's better not to say anything than to say something that's offensive. Because you really don't know the right words to say, so you'd rather just not say anything. It can be dismissive. It can be dismissive to the person who's grieving, so don't say anything. Just allow them to process their feelings. Allow them to process their feelings honestly and as long as it takes them. That is the natural part of grieving, as hard as it is, as much as it takes time. Allow them to process it the best way they know how. Do not minimize their feelings. You guys have a great week. Bye-bye.